Good morning, Wisdom Seekers. Welcome to Wisdom Seeker Live, now on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. Glad to have everyone here this morning. Look forward to having as many of you as possible join us. Want to start out with information on the show a little bit, do some admin, cover some details. One thing, such as what I'm doing currently, is I am operating multiple screens so that I can best do what we want to do here today. And so I want to let you know if I appear that I am seemingly distracted. I promise I'm not. I'm just trying to make sure that the experience that we have is as good as possible. Good morning, Tausif. Glad to have you this morning. And Karen, welcome. And what I like to let people know that have not been a part of this podcast before is a little bit of clarity about what wisdom is. Wisdom is a process that we go through, and it starts with a learning knowledge, gaining knowledge, and which is facts, figures, information that we can gain from multiple sources. Of course, now with the internet, just even more sources than ever before. And then once we gain knowledge based on experience and understanding, we then begin to take that knowledge and apply it and in what we do and who we are. And that is the experience that we gain, which is all really good. In fact, part of my concern as we talk about education is that we stop at the knowledge level and that we don't validate experience and understanding. And then the last step, big picture in this process is where we go from knowledge and understanding and move into wisdom. And wisdom, in the most general sense, is seeing things, seeing our life, seeing what we know and understand, and all from a much larger perspective. And that perspective must be outside of ourselves. And that's the key. That if it's not outside of ourselves, it's just experience. Because when we begin to gain wisdom, we don't just think in terms of ourselves or how things affect us, but we take into account how much it affects other people, other things, other situations, and so on. So that's a little bit about what we look at or how we look at wisdom. And then a couple of other notes about housekeeping, if you will, or admin is please let us know where you join from. It's always interesting because our audience is international. And the other thing I ask is that as we go along during the podcast, if you have a question or a comment, that you will feel free to type it in, because in order to make this the most enjoyable, best learning is to hear from as many of you as possible along the way. So what I want to do is anytime we discuss topics that are specific, I like to get some varied perspectives and present them in different ways. Good morning, Lori from Charlotte. Lori's just about a neighbor to me here in Georgia, so welcome. And so anyway, I like to, I guess it's the teacher in me or trainer in me that just doesn't let me approach things any other way, but to present it in ways that will allow different learners to and be able to learn. So first thing is, and for the I guess I should make sure that I remind everyone the topic today is about education and trying to look at how to have wisdom in making education choices, because in our current environment, education choices, along with affecting our lives down the road in a big way, it also has become, especially at the university level, has become expensive, and in some cases, for those that choose education, private education at the K-12 level, it can also be very expensive. So let's look at just, I like Merriam-Webster's dictionary definitions because they've been around a while, and their definition of education is action or process of educating or being educated, or a stage of such a process. Second meaning they give is the knowledge and development resulting from the process of being educated, and the field of study that deals mainly with methods of teaching and learning in schools. So that's your dictionary version, and I'll get into the concepts as I see them here in a few minutes. I thought it was interesting. I don't normally do this, but one of the challenges we have in regards to education currently, let me make this a little larger, is there is, in my estimation, there is a lot of unclarity about what is going on in education. And one of the things that I want to do today is really open up some information in regards to where we are in our current education system, because I think that's important. And in this Google search that I did, says education is a process facilitating learning or the acquisition of knowledge, skills, values, morals, beliefs, and habits, and that educational methods include teaching, training, storytelling, discussion, and directed research. In most regions, education is compulsory up to a certain age. I like this concept. My concern is that it is may not represent well what our education system is fully about currently. Welcome, Rosemary from Sydney, Australia. Glad to have you with us today. And let's look at a couple of these others. It was just interesting to get the variety of perspectives. True education is beyond earning degrees. It is more than bookish knowledge. Education means inculcating moral values, positive thinking, attitude of helping, attitude giving to society, and ethical values. These kind of students are only able to bring changes in society. And it just went on and on as I looked, which was very interesting that there are such a diversity from the Merriam-Webster definition to all of the additional thoughts. Welcome, Sam. Sam's a neighbor here in the Atlanta area. Glad to have you with us. And the idea is, and what I think a lot of us think our education system about, is what this one says: purpose of education has always been to everyone, in essence, the same, to give the young the things they need in order to develop in an orderly, sequential way into members of society. I think that's kind of what we think of it. So I'm not going to read out all of these. It's real easy. If you can see, all I did was type in the word education in the Google search and came up with quite a variety of information. And then the other thing, again, because we all learn in a variety of ways, I like to bring in visual. And what was really remarkable to me in this visual, and you'll see, again, I just searched education and looked for images. And what is telling to me is, as I looked at these images, I'm looking at a lot of, first of all, symbols of knowledge, and that's in the form of books. And then I am seeing images that even go back to, and like in this one, that show an old chalkboard, which goes back to when I was a kid. And then I see images that are traditional in what a classroom is. Got everybody sitting at a table and being lectured to by someone. Let's see, I saw another image. But what was striking is that the images that we think of education are very traditional and go back many years. And one of the notices that I had in this is there are some places where we see computers, but they're, from a standpoint of priority, a lot of what we primarily see is books and paper. Nothing wrong with books and paper, and traditional desk segregation of people, not based on anything but just setting apart. I want to be careful that I don't misrepresent something, but sitting in desk in a classroom. So interesting images that I believe reflect the priorities in education currently. Yeah, Rosemary, I understand chalkboards. They bring up a lot of memory. I remember as a youngster helping to clean out the erasers from the chalkboards. That was considered, by some, that was considered a privilege. By some, that was considered a punishment. And but it does bring back a lot of memories. So I want to talk a little bit about where we are in education, and let me define a couple of terms to make sure that I'm clear, because when I train leaders, one of the biggest things I have to train them in is is beginning to communicate well. And part of effective communication is making sure that we are talking about the same thing as we use words. So as I will talk, my reference to education is a reference to the formal system that we generally have. And in most cases, it is a public system sponsored by government entities, and it is in a brick and mortar environment, a building somewhere. And it has been around as we know it for about, in the form we know it as, for maybe 100 years or more. It depends on which country and how you define it, but just that's my reference to education. And learning, to me, is a much broader concept. And when I use it, I'm talking about learning to the extent that, for example, I approach each day with the idea of learning something new, whether it's a big something or a little something, just learning a new thing. Because, to use a popular phrase, I am a perennial lifelong learner, in spite of the education experience I had. And so learning is that's what I think about. When I talk about teaching in this environment, I'm referring to pedagogy and methodology that is considered current in our current environment and our current settings, teaching wise. And what I think of that is traditionally a teacher that gets up in front of a class and presents materials, typically in a lecture format. And then what happens is students are then asked to practice or repeat those concepts to a point where they remember them, so that they can then apply them in certain situations, but primarily in taking an assessment of some kind, which is typically a written assessment, to demonstrate that they have mastered a piece of information or a piece of knowledge. And so that's kind of when I mention teaching, that's what I think of. And one thing I want to share that and make completely clear is, those of you that have followed me know that I am somewhat, no, I wouldn't say somewhat, I would say pretty critical of our current education system. And, and with that, I want to make it clear that I am not primarily addressing my comments to the rank and file teachers that are currently part of the education system. Having been a teacher, I understand how hard teachers work and under what challenging conditions they work, because frankly, the education system is not generally friendly to even the teachers involved, because of the way the system is set up. And by the way, as you share comments, I like to highlight those on screen. So thank you for that. And Karen, let's see, get them in order here. Karen shared, we all learn something new every day. Karen, I hope so. My concern is that we have developed a culture where learning is too much attached to the brick and mortar institutions, and that learning is considered primarily done through those institutions during our times of formal learning. And so I agree that it should be part of life, that we should be learning every day. My concern is that currently the system that we have is not fostering that concept. And I appreciate Sam's comment that I'm not alone. What's been real interesting and what inspired me to address this in my podcast is the recent poll that I did. And this poll has been one of the more active posts and polls that I've had. And my question is about the heavy use of written tests or written assessments to determine whether a student has truly learned what we have and what we expect them to learn. And the results have been rather remarkable. And in fact, let me see here if I can get that post brought up. I'll show you what the results look like. And it leads me to believe that there are a lot of people out here that have concerns about education. And I certainly appreciate and understand that, because I share that. And the other thing I would like to mention, when I ever get into these discussions, people will point out to me that there are a lot of, they will point out to me the exceptions, which there are. And I'll talk a little bit about those exceptions momentarily. But my concern is that they are exceptions that are doing what I think we really need to do, and they're not the rule. So let me get here again. Hello, Tricia. Glad to have you with us today. So let me get to this poll. I want you all to be able to see it so that you understand where I'm coming from on it. So let me bring the screen back up. Okay. So this was the poll that I did recently that has kind of sparked this. And you see, my question was, do we get a true assessment of students' abilities by relying so heavily on written assessments? So just to clarify that I'm not saying that there is no value to written assessments. Having been a educator and will ever be from the rest of my life, I recognize the value of that. But if you'll notice, 82% of the people that responded don't think it is a real a value, or not as the way we're using it. And that echoes what my concerns, my suspicions are. And like I said, you can see that this has been up for a little while. It's already over 40,000 views, and almost 800 people have voted. So this is a good indication of what's the sentiment that's out there. So that's what kind of sparked me to approach this morning, because I believe that it is a topic that is on the hearts and minds of a lot of people. And so let's get a couple of comments. Rosemary says, far too many people believe that school is where children learn, and parents have taken the easy option of outsourcing responsibilities. That is a mouthful, Rosemary, and it's, as we discuss this, I suspect we will delve into that further. And I completely agree with you there that part of the problem we have in education, and I think if you ask most rank and file teachers, they will echo this, that we have parents that have abdicated their responsibility and expect the teachers to raise them. And I like this additional comment. I'm just as responsible for helping to teach my grandchildren as I was for teaching my children, and for being support for the teachers in place. Another great comment, and I appreciate that. So some things that that concern me about the current education and system is I want to share some insights that I'm afraid that a lot of people aren't aware of, because a lot of parents, a lot of us, once our children, or even while our children are going through the traditional education system, we are not, culturally, we're not engaged with that system. We have certain assumptions that that system is doing what we need it to do to help our children learn. And so we are, unfortunately, are very hands-off. And as a result, the system itself has become its own entity, and it's also become quite a enterprise, using a lot of it, our public money, to become that enterprise, and as much of a business as it is an entity of learning. And what's really interesting is it's become such a business, but yet it, generally speaking, frowns on businesses being involved, and other than sending money, or businesses, the model of how to do business as part of the process. So those are concerns that I have about our current model. And the other concerns that I have is our current model is geared primarily towards one learning style, and that's auditory. And secondly, it is geared primarily towards young people that are academic learners. And that is a segment of the population there. And the concern I have there is that representation of the population, assuming even just a standard split in learning styles, is a small percentage. So there are a lot of young people that are getting left out of the process because their learning style is different. Sam makes an interesting comment. Absolutely, now more than ever, all political with a definite agenda. And yes, Sam, that is another concern that I have with the current education system, is it has become a tool for social engineering. And looking at those various definitions, you can see that some people know and are aware of it, while others, I think, are well, you ever have those moments where you blank out? Welcome, Dr. Clayton, and I appreciate your comment. Dr. Clayton says that learning styles are a myth and all learning needs a holistic quality. I agree and disagree. I would say that we do well to appeal to a variety of learning styles for everybody's benefit, because no one learns purely by one learning style. That is true. We all have various learning styles, but it is very evident that we have a dominant learning style. And the more that we can provide a variety of learning styles in education, the more likelihood that the people will have better success getting the information, certainly. So thank you for that comment. Welcome, Lee. And Lee makes a comment that, and also being treated as if they are less intelligent. Yes, I understand your comment, Lee. Having been a teacher that had a very high mixture of learning disabilities or special needs. In fact, when I first started teaching, my student population, and I taught in the K-12 arena, my population was 58% special needs. So along with being a regular education teacher, I, by necessity, had to learn about dealing with special needs populations. And it was very eye-opening to me, both in my formal training as a teacher, as well as my experience. And Lee makes a comment, and I apologize, Lee, for some reason. Sometimes people's name shows up as LinkedIn user through the streaming service, but this is Lee Patrick. And so thank you, Lee. And Lee says, Dr. Richard Clayton, I also agree and disagree. Holistic is always the ideal, but it's not within the time frame of curriculum being taught in most schools. I even found that in Montessori schools, which Montessori is another approach. And so, yeah, and Sam makes an interesting comment that unfortunately we've segregated and categorized to the detriment of students. Students adopt as true what is told to them. And Sam, that is another concern that I really have with especially our K-12 system, is that we are focused primarily on the academic approach to learning, and those that do not learn in a traditional academic sense end up getting categorized and even labeled. And frankly, and I hope I don't offend anyone with this one, but it has caused us to identify a lot of young people who don't learn in a traditional academic sense, but learn, as Dr. Clayton mentions, in a more holistic fashion. And those students get labeled as special needs or at risk, and that concerns me, because they are not truly at risk. They just don't fit the mold of production education, or the traditional academic model as we're using it. And so we have a lot of young people that are being left out because they do not fit that model. And frankly, that's part of what's become of our system, going back to the original poll I shared about written education, written assessment. And that is, it has become about production rather than helping the learners learn in different ways and fostering that learning. And I understand to some degree, again, having lived in the education world, that there has to be efficiencies, because at the end of the day, we theoretically are going to formally educate everybody. That is the intent. And we saw that in the verbiage or the concept of No Child Left Behind and other education initiatives. So I get the need for efficiencies. But what we have done in the process is we have begun treating students like machinery. And we are trying to run them through an education production system, and it's becoming less effective each day for a number of reasons. And we may have to do another podcast relative to this to break down some of this into detail. And again, Lee makes a comment. Samuel Delgado, yes, that's so. And often they aren't willing to go beyond the benchmark of the members of their family who have preceded them. So I think we're talking about messaging that we see occurring in education, and that is that you can't succeed in education because maybe you're the first one in your family to even attempt to get that level or attainment of education, and it's indeed happening that way. And so the other concern that I have culturally with our education system is that we have made, as a system, education out to be life, and that and it has become valued to a point that people that don't reach or attain their education goals become hopeless. And to the point, I can't speak to other regions because I've not explored this, but I know in our region, we are watching a rise in suicides among teenagers because, and this is from demographers and people that are much smarter than I am, that tell us that they are becoming suicidal over things like not attaining an education score that they feel like they should attain, and they have not gotten into the school that they think they should, or they did not reach a milestone, whatever. But education has become such a priority in life that we lose sight of what life is really about. So, and then back to Dr. Clayton's comments, the output of traditional education was people able to work on assembly lines. And yes, unfortunately, that's where we're stuck, Dr. Clayton, is in an industrial mindset philosophically and from an application standpoint. And I agree that it's not what we need today. And I don't think that, given what we know in education and learning, it is not a good place to be from a science standpoint. And so Sam makes a comment. We already know from history some of the brightest minds do not fit the mold of our educational system, and we've made it even more difficult with the focus on STEM and eliminating the arts. Again, yeah, I appreciate the value of STEM because the areas that I have taught and moved in primarily would have been are related to STEM, but there are people that don't need to be in STEM because it's just not who they're designed to be. It's not part of their makeup, and they are being set up for failure in the process. So some people, in fact, I have a family member that is just extremely talented from an artistic standpoint, and if they were not allowed to pursue that, I think it would be a very big injustice. Let's see, Rosemary shares a comment. Says, I was a volunteer basketball coach at a primary school. My best players were not good students. The best way for them to understand basic math was to take lessons on the basketball court. Others had trouble learning to spell, so we took the spelling lessons on. So Rosemary's comment is well taken, and I agree with it completely. Part of what I did when I was teaching was, in fact, this was a vision that I put on the wall, is that, I wanted to provide all of my students a context for learning. And in particular, at that time, it was based on what I was the subject matter I was teaching, but I would not restrict it to that, but to provide a broader context for learning for young people. And when I did that, and when I started applying that concept, plus letting the young people know that's what I was doing, it had a remarkable change in the demeanor of my students and what went on in my class. In fact, frankly, it helped to change my need of focus from primarily being applying again, we could go so deep on so many different areas, but one of the areas is teaching leadership styles, teaching styles, and mine natural style is a commander, and you can conjure up your own concepts of that. But when I first started teaching, I primarily had to use that leadership style to approach my class, which is necessary in some situations, but it is not the desired place to be. Rather, the required place to be, or the best place to be, is as a facilitator, and so that I am helping young people have the tools to learn, and my primary role is to facilitate and offer additional insights as they pursue learning. And to Rosemary's comment, taking that concept to students meant, for example, and I try not to tell too many war stories, but I had a young student that was in my class, and this young man's name, his name not important. I don't want to take any chance of causing anyone any problem, but this young man approached me because one of the concepts that I taught as part of my course was applied math. And in fact, it was the second part of the course. And when we started into this young man approached me and said, Mr. Ward, I can't do math. And of course, as a professional teacher, I was aware that this student was identified special needs, and so I was aware of it. And I said, well, why can't you do math? He says, well, I have been identified as learning disabled, and they tell me that my learning disability is in the area of math. And I treated every student that I had, regardless of whatever labels or identifiers. I assumed that any young person can learn given the right opportunity to do so. So I went on to ask the student, I said, okay, so help me out here. Said, you go to the fast food restaurant and you purchase a hamburger and fries and a drink. And I guess this is going to tell my age a little bit, but you make this purchase, and the person tells you that it's going to cost $3.25, and you give them $5 bill. What will be your change? Well, as you can imagine, this young man was not he was not dumb. He was not incapable. He was just identified and labeled. And so quickly he comes back with the answer to how much change he should get back. And he did it accurately. And he didn't have to pull out a calculator, take his shoes off, count with his toes, anything. And I looked at the young man and I said, I thought you can't do math. And he said, I can't. And I said, you just did. And what I went on to explain to the young man was that he can learn math. He just doesn't learn it in the traditional academic sense. And ultimately, this young man was in my program for 4 years. And by the time he was completed, his academic math, scores had improved. And he was actually helping younger students in my class with math concepts. I'm not talking adding, subtracting. I'm talking about practical application of the Pythagorean theorem. And so what it showed to me was that these labels and tags we put on young people, they buy them. They buy into it, and they stop trying because they've been told they can't. And that's part of the system, unfortunately, that we are dealing with currently, that I don't think many people understand, especially those that are removed from the education system and those that are not engaged in what goes on. And so, yes, Dr. Clayton has a comment. Cave painting comes before language in human evolution. Art is of criticality to our intelligence and resilience. And so he's supporting the idea of not excluding arts as part of the learning process. And I agree with Dr. Clayton that the idea is that we need to have a more holistic, or the term I use, contextual approach. And one of those contextual concepts is how it's used, not just in theory, but where it applies in the world that our young people are going to live in. And one of the pieces that I would always do is, if I taught a concept to a young person, the goal was always to tell them why that they needed to learn this concept. And that was because of needing that context, which, by the way, there was a study done by the Gates Foundation a few years back, and it was why are students dropping out of school, and the highest majority single response in the 35% range was students were bored or thought what they were learning was irrelevant. And that points to another problem in the current education system we live in. And what I would suggest is the philosophy that has caused us problems in this area is the philosophy of universal education, which goes back actually and is attributed to Benjamin Franklin. And the idea is that a well-rounded individual needs to have education exposure to everything, which in context, yes, but in application, no, because not everyone can learn every concept to the point of mastery in every area. And one of the evidence of this being a part of our current culture, and in my estimation, a problem part, is in the university level educations, we have people that are pursuing education in humanities that are required to take lab sciences. And to me, that is an illogical approach in terms of if they're going to learn the humanities and become an expert in a field of humanities, it is really not necessary for them to have a complete and or even a high level of understanding of some of the sciences. And so this concept of universal education and a well-rounded person is another concept that is a problem. And it is driving our education to the point that it's leading to some of the other concepts that Sam spoke about earlier. We get into political, social agendas that are driven under the auspices of having well-rounded people, and it ends up playing out in our business world, because what happens is we assume in the business world that we need to teach people in their weaknesses so that they can do multiple things, and that is part of being well-rounded, whereas we see more and more evidence that the value there is to work and learn and improve in our strengths. That is the most effective. Doesn't mean that in some points and times we can't learn and improve in our weaknesses, but that shouldn't be the primary pressures. And let's see, share a comment from Sam. Says, Dr. Richard Clayton, this has been one of the greatest challenges I've faced as a teacher, trying to get students to work out solutions from abstractions. I believe this to be at the core of mastering critical thinking. And Sam, you hit on another concept that concerns me about our current education system and the model being used. Is it is primarily, and again, I know there are exceptions out there, they are primarily geared towards the theoretical and being able to express the theory and discuss the theory, and not enough on, okay, assuming the theory is true, then how do we use it? And so the concept of application has become a low priority in general. Exceptions are there, I always acknowledge that, but that's where we are so focused on strictly the lower concepts of Bloom's taxonomy, and that is primarily knowledge, going back to where we started this session and the whole concept of assessing. And much of the assessment we use, especially in the K-12 system, it's probably not quite as prevalent in the university level, but we are teaching and testing to the lowest level of Bloom's taxonomy. And what we see as a result is that the primary means of quote unquote learning is in the form of rote memorization. And rote memorization is ineffective. Generally speaking, it can't be done away with. It shouldn't be done away with. But right now, the majority of what we do is based on rote memorization. And the problem with rote memorization, for those of us that have learned about how learning occurs and retention and so on, is it's the lowest level of retention. And so many of us that have gone through the education system currently learned a lot of facts and figures back in the day, but if you ask us now to use probably 90% of it, we can't do it. I took 3 years of French, and my French consists now, even though I have made a conscious effort to focus in on using some other languages, my French at this point consists of probably a couple of dozen words and maybe a few phrases after spending 3 years studying. that's to me, that's a snapshot of the problem that we are dealing with. Let's get Lee's comment up here. It says, I work with Australian Aboriginal people and facilitate art workshops. It's in this context that I see incredible intelligence portrayed through art. And so, again, the support of the more holistic look to include a variety of options. And the key here is that not everyone should experience all of the options to a level of attainment that is designed to make us so well-rounded. I think it's appropriate at moments in time to allow for exploration, even encourage exploration of different elements, such as art and other areas, but it shouldn't be the primary thing, especially after a certain point. And the other concern that I have with our current K-12 system is that the primary focus, and people will try to argue this with me, and I'm sorry, I probably won't be changed on it, but the primary focus of our current system is to push all young people to attend a university. And it's, if anyone takes any sort of critical look at the K-12 education system, you should be able to readily confirm that this is true. And the problem is that first of all, the university form of post-secondary education is not the only one, and it is apparently not the best for a majority of young people, because at this point the success rate in the current university system, if degree attainment is the measure, is about 30%. That is a data provided by the U.S. Census Bureau, and what I hear from other people from around the world is it's consistent there too. So that tells me that roughly 70% of the people involved don't need to be in a university setting, and that is not saying they are incapable. It just, they do not fit that model nor need to be pushed into it. And there are a multitude of other options that are not being considered as part of that K-12 education process. And that includes one that is an area that I am working with. I work with an organization doing workforce recruiting, and that's through apprenticeships. It is an amazing opportunity for young people to do post-secondary learning and do so in a way that it fits them and their learning style, if you will, or again, their dominant learning style. And then there is the military, which in most countries, the military consists not just of on-the-ground warriors, but in a complete structure, organizational structure with all kinds of jobs and opportunities at multiple levels. And in the IT arena and computer area, there are certifications that are better suited to help someone become effective in their arena. I'm going to step out a little on the edge here, but what is it, C+ and C++ certifications for those in the information technology or IoT areas. So what we've got to do is start becoming more holistic, as Dr. Clayton mentioned, and offering those opportunities. And Rosemary, I see you're got to take off. I appreciate you being here. join us next week. I suspect we will continue this conversation based on the response. And I appreciate that Lee shares that skills shortages are in many countries. I know it is a prominent problem in the U.S., and Lee says it's so in Australia, and from what I understand, in many other countries. And now there are some models in Europe that address this somewhat, that have helped in regards to skilled people in the process. But generally speaking, it is not considered a good option. And yes, Sam, I agree with you. For those people that are paying attention, is that we're realizing that the ROI of in regards to degrees is diminished remarkably. In fact, I've got to dispel a myth that is prominent in education, especially at the K-12 level, and that is that it's always been taught and told that young people that only graduate from K-12 or high school level will only on average attain a certain level of income. But if they go on, excuse me, drying out there, if they go on to experience a degree, gain a degree of some kind, that they are going to statistically make more, millions and millions more in their lifetime through their work. And I understand how that's arrived. It is based on median data, and I get that. But the problem with median data is that it is just that. And given the opportunity, young people don't have to be median in their outcomes and results if they are given the opportunity. For in a particular example that I have seen, and I'll share some resources, by the way. I have written a good bit on this topic, and also have some resources within my resources that might be helpful. But there is a video called Success in the New Economy that does a tremendous job of contextualizing our education choices in light of careers. And in this particular video, it shows the fallacy of the median approach, because it takes, I believe, a young person that achieves a BA degree compared to an electrician, and based on the median data for both of those areas, the earning potential is indeed, I apologize, ooh, pollen in our area, sorry, is the median incomes in that situation. The young person that attains the BA degree will earn more on average, which if you put extrapolate that out over theoretical 40-year work life, it shows up that way. But to really give a full context, we need to consider also the extremes in this case, such as the BA earner that finds a career in their role, in their area that they earn their degree, and they're really good at it, passionate at it, versus the electrician that is doing that just as a backup, doesn't really like it, but he didn't have any other apparent options. Or the inverse, and that is that you put the BA student in a situation where they are not happy in what they do not perform at their highest level, and then you put the electrician in the situation where they're doing what they enjoy, they're good at it, they learn about it well, and so on. The numbers are remarkably different. In fact, they are quite opposite of what we're being told. And so that is a problem that we've developed. Well, our time is getting away, and I think, in fact, I'll go ahead and commit that next Monday we will address this some more. But there is so much wisdom that needs to be gained, especially parents and grandparents. Please don't assume that the education system, as we know it, is doing for your child what you want it to do and need it to do for them. Couple of alternatives, and we'll talk some more. We can probably do a whole hour on alternatives, but two that I am aware of currently is one that I've become involved with, which is the International Internship University, which is is being developed in India, and it's an alternate post-secondary approach to education, and really innovative in a number of ways. I encourage you to check it out. And then one of my LinkedIn network connections, Dr. I. Addison Zhang, is started an initiative called Classroom Without Walls. I encourage you, if you have children or grandchildren in the K-12 arena, that you check that out with Dr. I. She's doing some tremendous innovation with that. So, wow, we're over time by a minute, and I apologize for not being prompt in finishing up. Thank you, everyone. And let's go ahead and plan to reconvene next Monday morning and further this discussion so that hopefully we can share a bit of wisdom in regards to education and help parents, grandparents, and young people begin to have some wisdom as they make choices in regards to education. So thanks, everyone. The engagement's been great. Appreciate all of you being here, and look forward to getting together again next Monday morning, 8 o'clock, here on LinkedIn or on Facebook or YouTube, wherever you're joining us from. And please, I encourage you to invite others. And after we get off, I will share some resources that I have for those of you interested. And anyone joining during the recording, feel free to comment as well, and I'll be watching and addressing those. Thanks, everybody. God bless, and have an amazing week.